Tonight's on Politicat, Gorsuch or go home. The president nominates his first Supreme Court justice. Monday Night Massacre, the firing of Sally Yates, and the man behind the curtain, Steve Bannon, moves up. All that and more on Politicat. It's your politics right now. And welcome to Politicat. I'm your host, Eric Miller. It hasn't been an easy week for the White House, with mounting political tension and significant unrest coupled with record low presidential approval ratings. For this point in the presidency, Donald Trump is feeling the heat. But public opinion doesn't seem to move him, and Mr. Trump has continued to push through executive orders and appointments. To begin tonight, President Donald Trump has named federal appellate judge Neil Gorsuch as his pick to fill Antonin Scalia's seat on the Supreme Court. The announcement came just over 10 months after Barack Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland. Gorsuch, who is 49 years old, is the youngest Supreme Court nominee since 1991 appointment of Clarence Thomas at age 43. Now, as a textualist, originalist, Gorsuch's legal philosophy is that the Constitution should be understood exactly as it was when it was enacted, not reinterpreted throughout time. Democrats are already preparing to block Gorsuch's confirmation in an apparent protest against the Republican refusal to hold hearings for Garland. For more, let's go to our panel. We're joined tonight by Sammy Coatl of the Northwestern College Republicans and David Gernon of the Northwestern Political Union. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight.
It's good to be here.
So, Sammy, I'd like to start with you. You were a pretty outspoken Trump supporter during the campaign. I'm assuming that hasn't changed.
Correct.
Yeah. So some folks are saying that Gorsuch is a good choice because he'll be a check on the president's executive power. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
I think that's a really accurate statement. He's made several judgments that have shown that he thinks that the judicial branch should not be deferring to the executive branch on certain decisions. And that's going to become really important in certain areas like immigration now. We want judges that are going to go up there and interpret the laws, interpret the Constitution in the right way, not just allow the executive branch to run wild.
David.
Sure. I think this is probably perhaps the most conventional thing Trump has done during his presidency. I think a lot of people applaud the pick. And I think in earlier times, he probably would have been confirmed, 100-0 or something like that. Obviously, we live in very partisan times, so I don't think that will be the case. I do think he'll get confirmed, though. He's obviously a very smart guy and intellectual. You can see it in his writing and things like that. There's talk about maybe the nuclear option, which would mean that just a simple majority would put him through, and we'll see if that happens. If it does, obviously Republicans have the votes to do it. If it doesn't, then he'll need a little help from the Democrats. And I think he's a pick that could generate a little bipartisan support.
Okay. And speaking of that nuclear option that you brought up, congressional Republicans have considered changing the rules of the game. As it stands right now, you need 60 votes in the Senate to get a Supreme Court nominee through. However, there has been talk that Republicans may reduce that number to 50, which would be something that's fairly unprecedented. Now, Sammy, what do you think about that? Are we going to see the nuclear option?
I think it's a really, really high possibility we're going to see that. But it's very unfortunate we're seeing that because it's coming off as a race to the bottom. The reason why this option's even on the table was because the Democrats themselves decided to change the rules a couple of years ago, and now it's come back to bite them. So I think it's a real possibility, and if the Republicans need to use it, then I say go for it.
David?
Sure. Well, you could argue, it's very unprecedented to have a justice sit, in the wings and not even get a vote, like Merrick Garland, what happened to him for about a year. So I think that would be unprecedented too. I think that if it's what it'll take to get him confirmed, I think they will do it. It would it'd change the course of history, the rest of history here.
Yeah, what could we expect the long-term implications of that being? Would it sort of play into the partisan contest that we've seen over the last couple of years?
I think it absolutely would, because a majority of 51 would then, you'd be able to whisk him through, any future Supreme Court nominee through, no problem. I think obviously, it was at 60 before to kind of encourage a little bipartisanship, I guess. But in today's hyper-polarized times, I guess maybe there's no room for that.
Sammy, would you agree with that?
I agree. I think that one of the biggest mistakes of the last couple of years is the Supreme Court's becoming more political Political parties are using them to advance agendas rather than defend the individual and defend the values in our Constitution. So I think that, like I said, this is a race to the bottom. It's not looking good, I think.
Yeah, and expanding on that, there's been a lot of Democratic criticism of the nominee. You know, David, you mentioned that in past years this might have been somebody who would have flown right through, but some folks like Sherrod Brown, the Democratic senator from Ohio, issued a statement this week that pointed out Gorsuch's rulings that corporations are people, rulings in favor of big banks and against LGBTQ rights, among other things, make him unfit for the job, in his opinion. Is this, are these really legitimate objections that we would have seen in the past, or is this kind of vindictive partisanship on part of the Democrats?
You know, it's hard to say that it would have happened in the past. I think, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the more polarizing members of the court, was nominated confirmed unanimously. So as just a, you know, you can see kind of how things have changed. I think you would have expected right away Democrats to come out and oppose him because of how things, you know, have gone in the past year. I think it was just kind of a given, but we'll see what happens.
Sammy?
Yeah, I think it's vindictive. It's really just the Democrats trying to get the Republicans back for not giving Merrick Garland a hearing. But the reality is that a Supreme Court justice hasn't been confirmed in the last 8 years during an election season. So I'm not really sure what the objection is in the Democrats. Gorsuch is a great nominee, and I think they should give him a shot.
All right, well, we'll just have to see how it plays out. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And when we come back, there'll be more Politicat after this break.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
President Trump hasn't only been busy with appointments, he's also been firing some folks as well. The White House released a statement Monday night announcing the dismissal of Sally Yates as the acting attorney general, choosing Dana Bonetti to replace her. The dismissal came after Yates announced that under her leadership, the Justice Department would not defend President Trump's immigration executive order. In the dismissal statement, the White House press was not lenient with Yates, accusing her of, quote, betraying the Department of Justice, being weak on borders, and very weak on illegal immigration. Now, what's more, Yates was informed of her dismissal only 2 minutes before the announcement was released to the press, which was not exactly a long lead time. Some people have been calling President Trump's action as a Monday Night Massacre, drawing comparisons to former President Richard Nixon's infamous Saturday Night Massacre during the Watergate scandal. And we'll touch on that again later in the program. So now we're going to turn to our guests once again. So Yates probably knew that the moment she refused to enforce the president's travel ban on Monday, she was effectively signing her own resignation as acting attorney general. After all, she was only serving as a holdover from the Obama administration until the nominee for attorney general, Jeff Sessions, is confirmed later this week. So if she was not going to hold the post for a long time anyway, why has this been such a big deal? David?
Sure. Well, you know, I think she's kind of become a bit of a figurehead for sort of the resistance movement on the left and you know, throughout the country. People see her as sort of you know, putting her foot down to you know, sort of go against what a lot of people see as an un-American, kind of a cruel executive order issued by President Trump restricting, you know, immigration from certain countries. So I think that's a lot of it. You know, a lot of people kind of have been waiting for someone to really kind of, you know, give it to President Trump, give it back to him. And in Sally Yates, I think they found someone who they can rally behind.
Yeah, Sammy.
Yeah, I agree with what David said. I think that the left is giving Sally Yates her 15 minutes of fame, and I think that the right is also contributing to that by making it seem like it's such a big deal that the acting attorney general refused to go with that order. So I think that really it's just because she's become sort of a symbol of resistance rather than the actual action.
Yeah, and Yates said the reason she refused to go along with the president's travel ban was because she didn't find it, quote, right. Not because it was unconstitutional or illegal. After all, it's the president's right to disagree with past administration stance and also to sign an executive order. So how can we reconcile what Yates stands for and what the president rightfully does? Sammy?
I don't really think there is a way to reconcile it properly. The Constitution's pretty clear. All executive power is on the president. And as acting attorney general, she's in the executive branch. She doesn't have the power or the right to refuse to follow through with that order. Had she had an issue with it, the best option would have been to resign and then go out with saying that, well, it was, she didn't agree with it. But as a member of the administration under the executive branch, her duty is to follow whatever the president says.
David, way to reconcile.
Sure. Well, there's been a clip, I think, from 2011 making the rounds in the media, which is where Jeff Sessions actually kind of ironically asks her what would she do if the president asked her to do something she felt was unlawful. And she said something along the lines of, it's her first duty is to the Constitution and to defend the law. And so I think, that's what she saw herself doing in defying the president. I think she knew, like you said earlier, that once she did that, she was out. But I think she, was committed enough to do it anyway.
Yeah. Now, previously, we also mentioned the Saturday Night Massacre in 1973, when the Nixon administration ordered the Attorney General, Richardson, and Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus to fire the Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, who was investigating the Watergate scandal. Now, both Richardson and Ruckelshaus refused Nixon's order and resigned. Both Trump and Nixon's behavior involved the controversial firing or resignation of Justice Department leaders who disobeyed presidential orders, and both happened at odd hours. So, do you agree that there are parallels between this historical incident and today? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Sammy?
I think they're completely different situations. Former President Nixon was committing crime, and the reason why he wanted Cox fired was because he issued a subpoena and he was going to find incriminating evidence against him. That's clearly very unethical. But like I said, Sally Yates was fired for not doing the duties of her job. And I think those are completely different things. I don't think Donald Trump committed a crime or was embroiled in such a scandal like Watergate.
Yeah, David.
Sure. Anytime something unusual like this happens, you kind of look for historical parallels. And I agree there are some similarities, but I think there are some important differences. For one thing, Nixon was firing his own appointee. Yates was, of course, an Obama appointee. He was also trying to get rid of someone who was investigating himself for crimes. Of course, as you mentioned, that wasn't the case here. And also, I think Yates was going to be gone pretty soon anyway. Of course, as soon as Sessions came in, he would have appointed his own deputy attorney general. So I think there are some important differences to note. But, of course, anytime something rare like this happens, you look for a quick parallel.
And does this set any kind of tone for Sessions coming in? Is he going to be expected to be really loyal to the administration, or is there not that kind of parallel in this situation?
Sure. Well, I guess it's tough to say. You think he's probably inheriting a Justice Department in a little bit of turmoil after all this, similar to kind of the State Department in a few ways. A lot of these departments are filled with career sort of public servants who it's unclear, I guess, where they fall on this, but certainly I would imagine there's some strong opinions in the Justice Department about this.
Sammy?
I agree. I think one of the reasons that Jeff Sessions even has this job is because he was an early and loyal supporter of Donald Trump. So Sessions is going to definitely has expectations to live up to.
Okay. And perhaps Yates' statement in a letter best sums up her understanding of her responsibility. She wrote, quote, "I'm responsible for ensuring that the positions we take in court remain consistent with this institution's solemn obligation to always seek justice and stand for what is right." Welcome back. In an unprecedented move this week, President Trump appointed Stephen Bannon, already advisor to the president, to the National Security Council. Now, Bannon, the former head of alt-right media outlet Breitbart News, received a permanent seat on the NSC's principal committee, meaning he'll be frequently involved in shaping U.S. national security policy. Now, equally surprising, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the director of national intelligence, who've traditionally had a permanent seat on the council, were seemingly passed over in favor of Bannon. Now, they were later offered positions, as was the head of the CIA, but it's interesting that the administration has decided to make this position, placing their advisor ahead of traditional members of the council. Now, so far in the administration, Bannon has played a large role in shaping President Trump's highly controversial immigration ban order, as well as several other executive orders. Now, to see what role Bannon might play in the NSC, we turn to our panel once again. Now, how much influence does Bannon have now, guys? What are we seeing in this multi-role place that he's designed for himself, Sammy?
He definitely has considerable influence in the administration. He's also become one of Trump's favorites because really Steve Bannon was one of the major architects of Trump's campaign. Steve Bannon basically mobilized an entire website for him, became a propaganda machine. So I think in that way, Trump has really come to trust Steve Bannon, and we saw it right now with the executive order that had his marks all over it.
Yeah, David?
Sure. I mean, I think we're seeing, that Steve Bannon now has a remarkable amount of influence in this administration, something that's worrying to a lot of people, I think, and probably for good reason. We saw, like was mentioned, he had a heavy hand in crafting the immigration executive order, and now we're seeing that he's going to have more influence on foreign policy. And so, if you look at it that way, what does the president do? He has foreign policy and he has domestic issues, and we're seeing that Bannon now has a hand in crafting, it's seemingly he's going to be able to craft policy in both of those areas.
And what is a Bannon-led foreign policy going to look like? Do we have any idea?
Well, I think, that's tough to say, definitely at this early stage, but based on Trump's campaign rhetoric, based on, Bannon's history at Breitbart, I think it's clear that Bannon will advocate for, a somewhat closed border America, an isolationist America, one that sort of, I don't think one that's going to be welcoming to a lot of immigrants and refugees.
Sammy?
Yeah, I think, Donald Trump really won the presidency by running on this populist campaign strategy, and I think we're going to see more of it in foreign policy. We're going to see a shift in who our allies are. We're already seeing Trump having very aggressive phone calls with traditional allies like Australia, and he's not getting along that much with the German chancellor. We're seeing a little bit of cozying up with Russia, and really, I'm not really sure what we can expect.
Yeah. To point out, the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, has been taking over a lot of the traditional duties of the president. He's met with several foreign leaders, including the King of Jordan, in the last several days. Is Pence sort of caught in the Bannon sphere like Trump, or is he more of an independent actor? What do you think?
I think he is. I think a lot of people who voted for Trump thought he was going to be a delegator-in-chief, and in some sense he has been, giving Mike Pence a lot of those jobs. But I think that if it's between Trump, Pence, and Bannon, I think the only one that has political experience is Mike Pence. The only one who has any sort of experience being in Washington is Mike Pence. So it sounds kind of weird saying this, but it seems like he's probably the most level-headed one out of the three.
David?
Sure. Pence is in kind of a funny position, I think. For a lot of the campaign, people were definitely questioning why he agreed to be the nominee for vice president for the Trump campaign. They were saying maybe it could be the end of him politically, and now here he is, one heartbeat away from the White House. I would say he seems to be someone maybe outside the influence of a little bit more outside the influence of Bannon, certainly than Trump. It is rare, I guess, for a vice president to go on some foreign policy visits like this. We'll see. I think he's acted more independently. He hasn't been in the news as much, which maybe he prefers. Kind of doing his things on the down low, but we'll have to see, I guess.
Now, this seems to have been his role a lot during both the campaign and the presidency. Donald Trump starts a few fires, Mike Pence comes in with the fire bucket and tries to put him out. So that's going to be very interesting to see play out. Now, what do we make of the fact that Trump has seemingly put one of his advisors ahead of traditional members of the National Security Council, like head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Director of National Intelligence. Sammy?
It's a little bit worrying. For example, one of the biggest reasons that this travel ban executive order was such a disaster was because he didn't listen to his actual foreign policy advisor, Department of Homeland Security. He completely ignored them and took Steve Bannon's advice. That's why it was so poorly rolled out, so poorly executed, so poorly worded. I think if Trump wants to control his image more, if he wants to give the impression that he's interested in a united America and just interested in actually policies that'll help Americans, he should definitely stop listening to Steve Bannon more.
David?
Sure. Well, I think it's very worrying. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Director of National Intelligence have sat on the council since its founding, in 1949, and now to put political appointee ahead of them. Of course, Obama had some appointees there in the early meetings, but they didn't have permanent seats. I think there's a danger in kind of insulating yourself with very few voices, and if Bannon has his ear in so many areas, it's going to be easy to get caught up in Bannon's vision of the world. But what the president needs to do is weigh, his experts' opinions and come to his own conclusions. I think it's very worrying.
Yeah. So in theory, the National Security Council is supposed to be a nonpartisan body. It's supposed to put U.S. security ahead of every other concern. But, Bannon is obviously a very partisan actor, and for the first time, he's a partisan actor with a permanent seat on the committee. Now, are we going to start seeing a more partisan NSC? Sammy?
I don't think necessarily we're going to see more partisan NSC. I think we're going to see, like I said, a foreign policy shift. And foreign policy shifts aren't necessarily partisan. They more sort of show where a certain administration's priorities lie. And since Trump ran a campaign on renegotiating trade deals, on fighting terrorism supposedly a lot more harder than Obama did, I think that's going to reflect those priorities rather than, a Republican agenda.
Yeah, David?
Sure. Well, what was the saying during World War II? Partisanship stops at America's shores. I think we're clearly not in that time anymore. If Bannon has this very influential seat, I think it has to be a given that things are going to be a little more partisan there. He's not necessarily a traditional, Republican conservative. So in that regard, I guess things won't be like that. But Trump's foreign policy, I don't think fits squarely into either party's camp, and Bannon has a hand in that, and I think he'll continue to do so.
Okay, well, like so much else in this administration, we're just going to have to wait and see. And that brings us to the final word. Now, in 1971, at the height of the Vietnam War, the U.S. State Department codified a messaging framework for the Foreign Service and its members and diplomats to communicate their dissent. It was a response to policies which had suppressed State Department officials' criticism during the war. Suppression such as that in a democratic system such as ours is a handicap for effective policy to be enacted. In the nearly half-century since this channel was established, several awards have recognized Foreign Service members who have expressed constructive dissent. Now, this is considered an integral part of the culture and duty of the State Department. In the wake of President Trump's executive order ban on immigration from 7 majority Muslim countries, a move which has proven to be highly unpopular among many citizens, diplomats, politicians, and the international community, this dissent channel has again become significant. A memo sent through the State Department criticizing the travel ban has gathered upwards of 1,000 signatures and counting. Dissent is a cornerstone of this nation, both culturally and legally. The First Amendment recognizes the right to dissenting free speech. Our founders' Declaration of Independence still serves as an eloquent example of dissent. The press can dissent against the government can dissent against the press. Dissent is one of the things that has made America great. It is the way our country reevaluates itself again and again. Press Secretary Sean Spicer took to his podium on Monday and said, referring to the 69,000 employees of the State Department at home and abroad as career bureaucrats, they should, quote, either get with the program or they can go. This attitude of hostility towards dissenting opinions from the White House is troubling. As new crises and decisions come up, there is bound to be disagreement among government officials, but that doesn't mean there must be discord. Disagreement is democratic, suppression is not. And that's our show for tonight, folks. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to our guests, Sammy Coatl and David Gernon. Pleasure to have you both on. This has been Politicat. I'm Eric Miller. Good night.